So this video in particular was actually part of a 3-part series I was doing. I'm really big into all of the superhero movies. I'm a really big DC fan. I have really mixed feelings about where the MCU is right now, as I'm sure the vast majority of us do. But I did these all in order because what I liked was just the emphasis on adaptations that there is usually out there in the film world, whether it be book adaptations, comic book adaptations, video game adaptations, biopics, any of these things that just kind of pull from other medias that they can create films for. So I did this string of superhero sort of videos. This first one was just about a lot of the movies that are based on comics that aren't as popular as, say, Marvel or DC. Then I did one about Marvel and DC, and then I did one about there being some original superhero films that don't come from comics. It's just people who really love superhero movies or had really good ideas for superhero stories. I think one of the movies in that video was about a novel that's about a certain superhero type in a way. But these 3 videos were a lot of fun for me, and I really do like them. So again, I'm reposting them like I did the majority of the last couple of videos I've done. And this one is just a fun one about comics. I do have plans to kind of break this up also into a little bit of a mini series to kind of put a little bit more details and get it a little bit more updated. But I just really wanted to bring all my content together so it's all in one place. So you're going to get this video, and maybe a couple months down the line, I might continue the series of movies based on comics that you might not know about. And if you have any suggestions of some other ones I have, you can comment them down below, or you could wait until the next couple of videos and see if I mention them there. Either way, I'd love to look into it more, so if you do have some, feel free to comment. I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, enjoy this video. The Snyder Cut is out, Falcon and the Winter Soldier has just started, WandaVision was a big hit, and the comic book, film, and TV universe continues to thrive. I started thinking of an older article I wrote when I was writing for a website called Movie Pilot, or Creators, however you remember it, and I felt it deserved to be discussed again. With the path that comic book movies have taken over the last 15 years, it's easy to forget that it really started as long ago as 20 or even 40 years. There's a lot of films that have been based on comic books that we might not even realize. So I have a hefty serving of 24 films based on comic books that might surprise you. I put this list together following 3 basic rules. Rule number 1, the comics have to come before the movie. Sometimes a film, a TV show, or even a video game can be adapted into a comic book series or even a novel after the fact. But these films on the list strictly come from a comic that existed beforehand. Rule number 2, like I said in my intro, some of these films date back to around 40 years ago, so there can't be a year restriction on this list. And rule number 3, the 2 big heavy hitters in the game will not be portrayed here. That's right, nothing from Marvel or DC is on this list. It is strictly comics from other publications. That includes comics that are by publications who were eventually brought out by either DC or Marvel. Yeah, those aren't on here either. So if you don't see any particular entry you know I'm missing, don't worry. I do have an idea for another video following those ones. Now, outside of the rules, I feel I also should mention that this is in no particular order. None of my lists essentially are. The numbers are there to help keep track and make sure I produce the amount I declare, and these aren't ranked in any way. Also, I think we should get a few obvious ones out of the way, so here's a few movies you should know were based off comic books by now, but just in case you didn't, The Watchmen, Howard the Duck, Judge Dredd, Spawn, which I hear they're going to make another one about, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed, Hellboy, Constantine being based on a comic called Hellblazer, and I hope we get more of that character as well, Casper the Friendly Ghost, Tales from the Crypt, Sin City, which is a fantastic comic series, all black and white, very minimal color, exactly how they portrayed in the films. Definitely read those if you're into it. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, also oddly enough, all black and white, with very minimal color, I believe, and actually a lot darker than its film and television counterparts. Dick Tracy, Kick-Ass, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, 30 Days of Night, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, The Boys, and The Umbrella Academy. Okay, we got those out of the way, let's start the list. First up, The Crow. This might not be too much of a shock for most hardcore fans of the film starring Brandon Lee. but this was a shock to me when I discovered it. The first film was hands down a classic, but after that, it just seemed weird without Brandon Lee playing the undead vigilante. Though it did make sense, and you sort of had to think, that's kind of logical. It's actually not the source material. It was originally published in 1989, and each comic, over 45 issues, follows Eric Draven. But each new film had a different character playing the Crow. Along with the first film, it has 3 other feature films, there's a short-lived TV series, and comics continue to be released under various publications, including Caliber Comics, Kitchen Sink Press, Image Comics, and IDW Publishing, with comics coming out as recently as 2018. Maybe that one wasn't a surprise, but this one should be The Empty Man. Yeah, this is the same Empty Man from October 2020. This horror film is based on a comic by Boom Studios that is still in publishing? It was originally a 6-part miniseries in 2014, but 8 more issues were released between 2018 and 2019, and it's listed as ongoing. I haven't seen this film yet, so I can't comment on whether or not it's good, but this was the last film I expected to derive from a comic book. Well, I guess then there's this one, Surrogates. This is a series of graphic novels released between 2005 and 2009 under the title The Surrogates. 5 novels in total were published by Top Shelf Productions, and this is the comic that inspired the 2009 film starring Bruce Willis. It's a pretty random and forgettable film, but the premise is interesting. It's funny to think that it was a graphic novel first, and it's probably a lot better than the film was. Next up, The Shadow. For those that may not remember or who are too young, the most recent film adaptation for this American superhero was in 1994. The Shadow character was played by none other than Alec Baldwin. That's right, at least one Baldwin brother has been a superhero. The character originated in the 1930s, and he was a huge hit when he first came out. He was in various comic strips, radio shows, television, video games, and he's had 5 feature films. It's clear that his appeal eventually died out since no one really hears or speaks about him anymore. There was supposed to be a new film directed by Sam Raimi, but as of 2012, it seems that's not going to happen. Let's follow that one up with Tank Girl. Originally, this was printed as a comic strip in various British magazines in 1988. It wasn't until Penguin Publishers brought up the rights and put the strips together when it actually became a comic book series. It was printed and published all over the world, including Japan, Spain, and Germany. Eventually, Dark Horse Comics won over the license and began printing it in color in 1992. It had a financially unsuccessful film adaptation in 1995, starring Lori Petty as Tank Girl, and other actors including Naomi Watts, Ice-T, and Michael McDowell. I believe the comic still has a cult following and is still loved by many around the world. Okay, so some of these you may know, some of these you may not. They can get a little obscure, like this next one. Two Guns. Another random and forgettable film from 2013. It starred Denzel Washington and Mark Wahlberg. I mean, that's an interesting casting choice, period. I've never watched it because it just seemed like it was a dumb story meant to compete with other action films of that same year, like Fast and the Furious 6, Man of Steel, Snitch, and a bunch of others. But this one just didn't interest me. What is true, though, it's actually based on a 5-part graphic novel series published in 2008 by Boom Studios. Who would have thunk it? I didn't, and I didn't think of this next one either. Accident Man. I love a good Scott Adkins movie. I feel he is one of the top martial artists out right now. It sucks that he picks up a lot of B-movie roles, but they are still fun and action-packed, like this one from 2018. And although its cover sort of gives it away, I had no idea it was based on a comic strip. It was published originally in a British comic called Toxic, which was just a collection of various stories. The publication and all the comics were printed in 1991. In 1993, Dark Horse published a 3-issue miniseries of the comic, and in 2014, all the stories were collected into a novel titled The Complete Accident Man, and published under Titan Comics. Keep your eye on Dark Horse, because you're going to hear a lot of that. Like now, The Mask. What's odd is I saw a lot of illustrations of The Mask over the years, but I thought it was just fan art, or concept ideas for new films. Not only did this catch me by surprise, but apparently This comedy from the 90s is based on a limited series comic book published by Dark Horse from 1991 to 1995. Not only that, the film is essentially nothing like the comics. The film is apparently dumbed down a lot. We all understood the purpose of the mask. It gives the wearer unimaginable powers based on who they are. In the film, Jim Carrey's character is a romantic, fun-loving guy. But we see when the bad guy gets it that it's completely different. Apparently, the comic goes deeper into that aspect, and it gets pretty dark. Next up, Extraction. Yeah, that Netflix movie with Chris Hemsworth from last year. That's based on a graphic novel from 2014, published by Oni Press. And get this, not only were the Russo brothers the ones who helped produce the film, but they were also two of the writers for the novel. It's a fun movie, but I had no idea it came from a comic. And the more I researched, the more I was shocked. Just like this one. Monkey Bone. What? This random 2001 comedy starring Brendan Fraser is actually based on a comic. Yes, I'm not lying to you. The comic is called Darktown, and it was published in 1995 by Mad Monkey Press in Canada. It was meant to be a miniseries, but only the first part was ever released, and it was apparently enough for a movie. I wish I could say I'm officially speechless, but we're not even halfway there. Time Cop. Not just another action film from the 90s starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, but also a comic by Dark Horse. It was only a 3-part story that ran from August to October of 1992, but it was enough to nail it 2 film adaptations. The first in 94 with Damme, and the second in 2003 starring Jason Scott Lee, the guy who played Bruce Lee in the docu-film Dragon, but there's no relation. Dark Horse, man, they own a lot, and the next ones are no different. Mystery Men. This film was released in 1999, and it has a barrage of awesome actors in it, including Ben Stiller, Hank Azaria, Janine Garofalo, Jeffrey Rush, Eddie Izzard, and a bunch more. It was hilarious, and I thought it was an original concept, but apparently it's loosely based off a comic series called The Flaming Carrot. Its publication rights were bought by Dark Horse from Renegade Press in 1988. Dark Horse had the rights until 2002 when it was sold to Image Comics, but the film came out under Dark Horse. Another one from Dark Horse, Virus. Talk about random. This 1999 science fiction horror film starring Jamie Lee Curtis is based on a comic. It's not even a graphic novel. It's just a one-off comic from 1992. Oddly enough, the writer, Chuck Ferrer, said he wrote the story as a script, but the special effects weren't there at the time. So he sold it to Dark Horse, who published it. Then it eventually got adapted into a movie. If only he held on a little bit longer. There's a lot of Dark Horse on this list so far. They really do own a lot of property that they don't really connect into a bigger universe like Marvel or DC do. But they do have great stories, most of the time. This might not be one of those times. R.I.P.D. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't mind it so much. I wouldn't go out of my way to watch it. If I was in someone's house and they had it on, okay, I'll deal with it. It's not a bad story, but definitely executed poorly. And it's a shame for actors like Ryan Reynolds and Jeff Bridges. But, shocking enough to know, this 2013 film is a one-off graphic novel from 2003, published by Dark Horse. Yeah, that took me by surprise. And I just keep getting surprised by this stuff. Cowboys and Aliens. This is another one which is strictly a graphic novel, only published in 2006. This is a pretty random film that really wasn't reviewed well, but the long story behind it is a little interesting. It was originally created in 1997, and the creators tried to sell the rights as a movie to various studios. Eventually, Universal Pictures and DreamWorks Studios acquired the rights and released it as a graphic novel first. The film adaptation wasn't released until 2011 under DreamWorks, and it starred actors such as Harrison Ford, Daniel Craig, and Olivia Wilde. Okay, this one's a little fun. From Hell. Another great feat by Alan Moore. He's definitely one of the better storytellers of the last 30 years. Oddly, the publication for this is rather all over the place. Originally, the concept was written in graphic novel format, but serialized and published in features for Spider Baby Graphics. Never heard of them before. The first few issues ran in an anthology collection under the publication called Taboo from 1989 to 1992. The creators then moved the project so it can be a standalone series. First, it was published under Tundra Publishing, then under Kitchen Sink Press, up until 1996. The entire series was eventually collected in 1999 and released under two publications, Eddie Campbell Comics in America and Knockabout Comics in the UK. The film adaptation of the same title was released in 2001, starring Johnny Depp and Heather Graham. And this is just a weird string of crazy events that led to this actual film that's part of Johnny Depp's history. Speaking of history, I promised you some old ones, right? Okay, let's go back a little bit. Weird Science. That's right. The 1985 teen film was originally based on a comic released in the 50s. The comic ran for 22 issues under EC Publications, and the rights were bought by the producer of the film, Joel Silver. And this happened before the major Comic Code Authority had been put into effect. The film is only based off of one story within the comics, titled Made of the Future, but the series itself is a collection of various sci-fi stories. Next, Barbed Wire. I believe this was the first lead role for a 90s sensation, Pamela Anderson, credited then as Pamela Anderson Lee. Of course, we know why. It was a bit of a flop besides putting her,
So bad. Great set of hands.
On the big screen, but the more shocking part is that it's actually another Dark Horse comic. Published between 94 and 96, the character was only given a short run before being adapted into film. This one might just be me, maybe you as well, but I still want to mention it. The Guyver. Maybe this isn't too much of a well-known character here in America, but it's very big in Japan. And it was one of my favorite movies as a kid. I knew it was based on an anime, but I didn't know it was originally a Japanese manga, which is what they call a comic book. Under the title Bio Booster Armor Guyver, the sci-fi story was serialized and released in 1985 under Takuma Shoten Publishing until 1996. In 98, the manga was re-released under Katogawa Shoten Publishing. It has been made into various anime series between 1989 and 2006. There are two American film adaptations, The Guyver from 91 and Guyver Dark Hero in 94. Here's a fun fact, Mark Hamill was a co-star in the first film. So let's move on, and let's keep getting weird. Bulletproof Monk. This is definitely one that caught me off guard. This random movie from 2003 with Chow Yun-fat teaching Stifler how to throw kicks and punches like the Matrix is actually based on a comic book. Released by Image Comics in 1999 in 3 volumes, it was shortly lived, both in the comic world and the film world. Now this one I actually think is pretty cool. Hercules. Not talking about the Legend of Hercules, which weirdly enough came out the same year as this other Hercules starring The Rock. I think that first one is more based on the actual lore, whereas The Rock's version is based on a graphic novel by Radical Publishing from 2008. The title of the book was Hercules, The Thracian Wars, but I don't know if they plan on doing another Hercules with The Rock, but it does kind of explain why 2 Hercules films came out in the same year. Here's another recent one for you, The Old Guard. This Netflix original film from 2020 is actually based on a current comic book series of the same title published by Image Comics. The first issue was released in 2017, and they continued to produce 6-part volumes over the years. The most recent one planned for a May 2021 release. Alright, let's go a bit farther back again. The Rocketeer. Here's a film you might not remember, or maybe never seen, but I do recall enjoying it when I was younger, and it does have relatively positive reviews. And it's on here because it's based on a comic from the 80s. The film was released in 1991. The first appearance was in a publication called Star Slayer from Pacific Comics. It went for 4 issues and then was collected and released under Eclipse Comics as a full story. A second installment to the story was released under Comico Comics in 1988. Then, in 1995, Dark Horse Comics issued a 3rd installment of the overall story. As of 2009, IDW Publishing has the rights and continues to publish various miniseries over the course of the last decade. Along with that, there was a short-lived animated series on Disney Junior, and A sequel to the original 1991 film is in the works and expected to release on Disney+. And last but not least, Whiteout. From what I've learned in looking into this, graphic novels are definitely a targeted commodity, and that's regardless if they're short-lived or only one-time releases. And this is another example. This 2009 thriller starring Kate Beckinsale is based on an Oni Press publication which started as a comic in 1998 and was fully collected all together and released as a full story in 2001. And that's it. No other versions of the story, no further publications, and I've learned that my feelings for how sometimes films don't need sequels can also relate to books or comics. Sometimes, if a story's good, you just need to tell it once. Now, before we finish this list, I do have one more I want to mention, and there's a very specific reason why it's not part of the main list. Oblivion. In discovering the various films that originated from comics, I discovered that there seems to be an odd situation revolving around this 2013 film starring Tom Cruise. The concept of the story was by Joseph Kosinski, who apparently had a graphic novel version of the film written, but it was never released. Various illustrations were given out at a preview event at Comic-Con under Radical Publishing, and that was it. The novel was supposed to have been released before the film, since the drawing for the artwork was being done in 2009. Radical Publishing said it was supposed to have been released by 2012, but nothing came out. Now, 8 years after the film, there's still no novel. A very odd situation indeed. I did enjoy this film, and I would love to see what a graphic novel had to offer. Well, there you have it, over 24 films based on comic books that I certainly didn't know about. Can you think of any other ones I might have forgotten? Leave them down in the comments and let me know. Subscribe to the channel, and look out for the next video where you might find the films I don't mention here. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and make me feel special. I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you for watching. My name is Jesse, and if Flix could talk, here's what they would say.